What are you thinking right now, sitting in front of the TV? Maybe you don't like my shirt, or you haven't been to the gym in a long time. Dozens and hundreds of fleeting thoughts occur every minute in our heads, and that's only what we have time to realize. But in our head, there are even more things that cannot be described with words. They appear in the form of images as unclear feelings or fly by unnoticed. There's a whole world in the brain. You probably often want to know what people around you are thinking about, especially what they're thinking about you. Or to see the world through the eyes of another person. It might seem to you that you see this whole picture at once, but you don't. First, you see lines, corners, circles, then forms, textures, color, the arrangement of parts. Then, based on imagination and previous experience, the details are generalized, temporary forms arise. And then we remember other forms similar to these ones, forms that we have seen or heard of. We remember them with all the emotions and experience associated with them. Here comes the whole picture. In other words, your brain in a fraction of a second recreates what is in front of your eyes and embeds this picture into your personal world. Having doubts? Close your eyes and realize that the world has not gone anywhere. It's in your head. Is it possible to see the world within us with the help of modern technology? Yes and no. You can connect sensors to different brain structures and even to individual nerve cells, but a miracle will not happen. On computer screens, there will be no picture of the inner world of a person because researchers don't have the right keys to decrypt the data. These keys are unique. They are hidden in a person's experience.
We can reconstruct the image that a person is seeing or saw a few seconds ago by analyzing the movement of their eyes, which is connected with conscious and unconscious perceptions, or just orientation in space. We can't trace one's thoughts in the same way. I think it's for the better. Let's keep one's secrets forever, okay? Let's keep what one is thinking about in a particular situation secret.
So the mystery of human thought is securely protected by the code of his or her personal life experience. But what is thought? We can't imagine what it looks like. We cannot detect it with any of our senses.
I assume that a thought is a formed program of action, but it is probably formed subconsciously. It comes to the conscious level when we become aware of it. Thought occurs through the process of realization, or when we think about something. So when we realize something, this concept is called thought.
Each of us constantly has to look for solutions, whether we realize it or not. And the solution is always inextricably linked to the need for choice. But how to make this choice if there's not enough information, or when it is contradictory? Every day, we get tons of information through our senses, not to mention how many sensors continuously measure our internal parameters. This kind of noise never subsists. But let's imagine for a moment that the world around us has disappeared. One click of a button and you can't see anything. You can't hear anything. You can't feel anything. No information from the outside. How will your brain react to that?
In other words, thought is a state of the brain or a state of the information that the brain is processing at any given moment. It's a state it doesn't like. It likes to get some kind of stimulation all the time. So even if we deprive a person of their normal sensations with the help of artificial manipulation, after some time, the person begins to hallucinate because the brain is trying to replenish the lack of external information.
What do you think is the worst thing for us people? Hunger, diseases, loneliness. The unknown. That's what scares our brain for real. Remember how painful waiting for something is, a call from a loved one, the results of an interview, a doctor's verdict, how slowly minutes trickle by, how many different predictions we make in our heads.
Uncertainty is bad evolutionarily because it is difficult for you to understand what to do next. For normal functioning, first, you need to have more or less familiar surroundings, and second, you need some kind of forecast on how your surroundings are going to change and so on. When you don't have that, you can't behave normally. You are forced to spend an insane amount of cognitive resources in order to cope with uncertainty. Uncertainty is like a task. It's very energy consuming. Look at the door. Please, what do you see? A shadow. Yeah, what's the shadow? Well, a person is standing behind it. Yeah.
Now our testee is not only in front of the door, but he also has to make a choice. He was instructed to open the door and to continue on.
Inhale, relax. You lost consciousness.
But we asked the hypnologist to work with the testee and suggest that there was no one behind the door.
You'll only see the light bulb. There's no one behind the door. You don't see any people behind the door. You go straight towards the light bulb. Okay, you are getting stronger now. You can stand on your feet. Open your eyes. I'll take you to the door now. Please, tell me, what do you see? Well, I see a light.
The consciousness, adjusted by the hypnologist, indicates that the passage is free, but the senses signal otherwise. We realize that there's no obstacle, but reality gives us different information, and it is opposite to what we think.
Anyone in front of the door? No. Move forward.
And then the brain makes a decision based on the information obtained by the senses, which means that it is impossible to pass through the door.
Close your eyes.
We are conscious of only a part of the world around us, and the brain creates a whole picture using these fragments.
You see everything that is there, without exception. Everything without exception. Wake up. Gradually, perception comes back. When you saw the door but couldn't see the girl, do you remember that moment? That's strange. I can't. Yeah. Well, no, I can't. I saw the door the whole time. For some reason, I saw the door very clearly. I see. And no one? Did you see anyone? I can't remember if I saw someone or not. I remember the door. Good. Every 100 milliseconds, we realize what we see. That's how often images arise in our mind. But what to do next? Next, we can complete the picture. We really see 100 milliseconds. Picture arises, we look at it without much attention to detail, then 100 milliseconds have passed and another picture arises. And then the brain merges these pictures together.
This is another reason why we can never penetrate into the inner world of another person. Almost half of it consists of adhesives between the frames and our perception of reality. So half of it is its own fantasy, but it's not even another person's thoughts that are hard to understand. For the same reason, to understand our own decisions.
I would suggest a dark blue tie for this shirt. It will go well with the dark blue or gray suit. A red tie is also a good option. It will go well with the dark blue suit too.
Maybe something darker?
If you want something darker, you could choose a lilac one.
This one?
Yes, you could try it on and see how they go together.
Yes, of course. Okay. How often do you think about the reasons for your decisions? Why this shirt, for example, and not something else? If somebody asked me that, probably I would find some kind of explanation, but I wouldn't be sure. I like this color. The fabric is pleasant to the touch.
It's pure cotton. It fits you well, too.
In hindsight, we can always find an explanation for our actions. Why we spend a third of our salary on a new phone, why we applied to this or that college, or why we weren't able to control ourselves when we ate half a box of candy. In most cases, we are sure that we act sensibly, rationally, and we choose our own destiny. And if that's what you think, I have upsetting news. Try to remember how often you did something that you hadn't thought about before, and then you felt regretful and bewildered. Was that my decision? It seems that the brain is becoming more independent in making decisions. We don't need to be aware of them. But how is that possible?
Our brain plays a mean joke on us. It decides everything for us. Then it sends a consolation signal back to us. It sends a signal saying, "Don't worry, it's all right. It was you who did it. This is your decision. Don't worry about anything. It was your decision." Wow, really? I mean, are we trapped then? All of your conscious thoughts, all of your conscious decisions are prepared by your brain before you realize what's going on. Awareness is the tip of the iceberg. There are a huge number of processes going on beneath. Now, there's no doubt that consciousness is a multi-stage process, and that mechanisms of the brain shape consciousness, but we know little about it.
Everyone knows that we're only using a fraction of our brain's power. There's usually a number given too, 20%. I don't want to disappoint you, but this myth is about 100 years old, and this, in fact, is a myth, albeit a very attractive one. Well, who of us would not want to discover superpowers, to feel special, like a Hollywood blockbuster hero? But do you really think that 90% of the brain's resources are simply stored and have never been used before? Apparently, on the contrary, over the course of human development, nature rid us of the tail, fur, excess breasts, and heavy jaws, everything that was rarely or never used.
The number of life situations you might find yourself in is quite large. Now, for example, I'm talking to you. I'm not doing any physical activity, so maybe I'm just using 20% of my brain, and it's enough for me to do this task. I'm not using all those areas of the brain that I have, the movement of hands, feet, and so on, but I'll use them when I play football, for example. So, in other words, we do really use 100% of our brain, but it depends on what area of the brain we need for a particular activity.
But in some ways, our brain's abilities are truly endless. How long do you think it will take you to remember a familiar picture?
There was an experiment. About 1,000 pictures were shown to people, or maybe fewer than 1,000 at the beginning. And then a week later, the testees recognized them with a probability of 95% of the correct answers. After that, I worked on it myself, showing 2,500 pictures, and 90% of the guesses were right. After that, one of the Canadian scientists showed 12,000 pictures. It took several days and nights, and again, a month later, 90% of the guesses were correct. Such experiments are not carried out frequently. We are perfect, unique image recognition machines.
And the speed of recognition is incredible, 50 to 70 milliseconds. But it's not surprising that the brain recognizes the image a quarter of a second before we do, another fact that proves our brain's independence. Everyone knows the legend of how Newton discovered the law of gravity. Why do apples always fall strictly vertically to the surface of the earth, thought the scientist. Apples fell vertically before Newton, too, but only he, according to the legend, was able to see a clue for an ingenious discovery in such an ordinary event. What was that? Sudden insight, or the result of years of reflection?
When we solve logical problems, a very large percentage of our brain powers are used. I'm not sure about the correct number, maybe 70% or even more, although I can't say for sure. But it's more than 50%. We solve them without realizing what we are doing. There is a brain study that demonstrates this. When we solve a problem and it is finally solved, who did it really? It is solved not when you spend hours thinking about it, but when your brain does the job for you.
At the beginning of the 20th century, researchers considered the frontal lobes of the brain to be insignificant. Their accidental injury had little effect on human behavior, and so appeared the myth of our brain only using 20% of its power. Today, it is known that decision-making, abstract thinking, initiative, self-control, and speech are the frontal lobe's responsibility. They occupy 25% of the cortex's area in modern man, and their weight is almost 50% of the brain's weight. We can say that the frontal lobes provide the initiative and control the execution of decisions. But it is still a question where those decisions are formulated and if there's a unified command center in the brain. A familiar reflex check. If I hit a certain place under the kneecap with a medical hammer, the leg will perform a reflex movement. It's programmed. Relatively speaking, it is a chain reaction of two nerve cells, but the more complex the behavior, the more structures of the brain participate in its formation. This is how it evolved. The more difficult the task, the higher the level it takes to solve it.
When it comes to very complex behavior, in one case, the emotional component can dominate. In another, memory of muscle movement. In other cases, something different. And different areas of the brain will be activated. And in all cases, decisions will be made. Sometimes the same decision can be made, but through different channels.
Imagine you see an old friend of yours. To shake hands is a simple mechanical movement controlled by the motor zones of the cortex. But the decision to take this action happens at a higher level, taking into account all the circumstances of the case. Let's say you know that this very friend borrowed money from your colleague, but the debt has not yet been returned, and you fear that you will face the same fate of an unlucky lender. Now in the decision-making process, to say hello or to pretend not to notice, you are forced to calculate the risks. Structures related to the assessment of possible negative consequences are involved in the work. For example, tonsils in the temporal lobe of the brain. But that's not all. The friend has a pretty sister you like. A small area in the prefrontal frontal zone of the cerebral cortex enters the game, which is responsible for self-control. As a result, you still say hello to your friend and reach out to him, most likely without even noticing the huge amount of work that your brain has accomplished in seconds.
There's a very fine line between the conscious and the subconscious. That is, the processes are mostly subconscious. Of course, we process some part of information consciously to determine what goes to the subconscious or stays at the conscious level. Many studies show that consciousness is only a way to systemize the world around us, and decision-making is connected with a great number of factors. Your genes, the activity of your neurons, the release of neurotransmitters, the activation of certain areas of the brain, and in hindsight, we explain these decisions with our inclinations, preferences, or upbringing. If our whole life was controlled subconsciously, it would be something like, I don't need this, I don't need that, but here's what I really need. How would we know what we really need?
Unfortunately, we cannot look into the future. Our brain can identify familiar images and make a picture of the world from them in a matter of seconds, but it cannot calculate all possible scenarios. That means neither we nor anyone else can 100% reliably predict our own decisions.
One of the dilemmas for neurophysiology is whether we will be able to understand the brain at all, because we will never be able to be inside of it. Can we make a subjective conclusion about it? Here's an interesting question. Is it possible to understand what it means to be a bat? And it all comes down to the fact that you might have a complete bat model. You can predict how a bat flies, what it will do in the next second. If you have a complete model, you know what a bat is. But can you understand what it means to be a bat?
The most important thing is not the initial structure of the brain, but how this initial structure interacts with experience. We can't separate our natural qualities and characteristics from how these natural qualities and characteristics interact with the outer environment.
No one can predict our actions with 100% probability, but it is quite easy to control them.
You see how your finger moves against your will at the request of the experimenter. A magnetic field stimulates the motor areas of the cortex that activate the neurons responsible for the movement of muscles. This is done without your participation, with the help of the magnetic field. Of course, it's very unusual for you to see your limbs moving while you have no control over them. In some simple situations, we can really come up with a solution in 8 to 9 seconds. But the time needed for a person to make a decision depends on the task. Sometimes 400 milliseconds is enough in very simple situations. It is indeed a very short amount of time. We cannot detect this activity so quickly with the help of scanners, magnetic resonance scanners. We need to use electroencephalography, or directly register brain activity. Every method has its own limitations. The scanner has a time resolution, as we call it. We can only separate processes in a few seconds. The MRI scanner is, in fact, a very slow device in this. In order to study the fine processes of decision-making, we have to implant the electrode in the brain.
Simply speaking, the entire toolkit of modern brain science cannot find reliable indicators of our own solutions. Things might be a lot easier. Surprisingly, in the decision-making process, we are very often dependent on our own body, literally.
Let's say you're sitting in front of a computer where questions appear. You have to answer yes or no, but the questions are ambiguous. So your decision depends on many things. The first group of testees had to do this movement with their head when they pressed either yes or no, and the second one, this movement. Surprisingly, the first group answers yes significantly more often than the second group. Astonishing. So it's simpler than making decisions. Everything works at very primitive levels.
Professional poker, a sport in which it is necessary to suppress emotions. If a player wants to win, he should never nervously look over his playing cards or chips. Show his surprise and smile if he's got good cards in his hands. Fortunately, we do not have to make decisions with a straight face in ordinary life. Our emotions are in our body language. You have probably noticed already that when you are in a good mood and there's a smile on your face, you are ready to achieve anything.
It seems to us that if we control our behavior, then we act consciously. That's not true. You got up today in a bad mood, and you will be impolite and angry with a person who has always been nice to you, not because they did something wrong, but because there's something wrong going on inside you. Well, this is a very basic example because we all know that we can't hide these feelings. We can't pretend.
When people talk about the influence of emotions, they mean their negative impact. The person was out of his mind, so he did something wrong or something stupid, or he was out of his mind and said some offensive things, and then he felt embarrassed about it. Of course, emotions can have this effect on our behavior, but emotions also have a huge number of different positive properties, and in this respect, they always take part in our decision-making. I mean, emotions can help you pull yourself together. Emotions guide you. Emotions give you a push when you need a lot of energy and concentration. So in this respect, the influence of emotions can be varied. They are not a verdict in themselves.
Yes, emotions affect all mental processes and often determine our decisions. But what happens if we are deprived of the opportunity to express our feelings freely?
Okay, this is your prop. And now I'll try to surprise you. I have a deck of cards. Get any card and sign it. Okay, leave your signature. So I definitely cannot have a duplicate of this card. This card is the only one in the universe. To make sure I don't have the same card, you can put down your phone number here. Okay, I'm kidding. That's not necessary. Look, here we go. You got carried away. I'll take the card with your signature and place it in the middle of the deck approximately. I'll shuffle the cards, and it will disappear from here, and it will be in a very unexpected place. Look carefully. Your 6 of hearts. Move it inside. Moving in. I know what you're thinking. So it's still your card with your signature. Look, I'll shuffle them again. 1, 2. It is important that the card is not the first or the last in the deck. Fine. Now, turn on your imagination. We get one card, and yes, the 6 of hearts with your signature. No one ever gets surprised. It's okay. Now look, I'm taking your 6 of hearts and putting it in here in my right trouser pocket. Free hand, rolled up sleeve, literally 2 fingers. And I'm showing it to you. Here you go, your card. Thank you very much. You may applaud if you like that. Oh, I didn't show the card itself. 1 second. 6 of hearts with the signature.
The spectators of this unusual performance decide at the end whether they liked it or not. One girl has her facial expressions limited. Will that affect her opinion? Now we will ask what impression the trick made on the spectators. Well, did you like it? Did you like the trick? Surprisingly, such a seemingly insignificant detail as a pencil clamped in the teeth does not allow one of the spectators to enjoy the performance fully. You can check this effect yourself. Try to watch your favorite comedy while frowning your forehead or pursing your lips. Most likely, comic situations and jokes this time will seem ridiculous to you. So your emotions and the decisions you make based on them really depend on your ability to express them freely.
For us, it's like an orchestra playing in our head. One party can be stronger and the other one can be stronger, and it leads to completely opposite decisions.
But not only emotions determine our decisions. The human being is a social being. We cannot exist without interacting with other people, which means, one way or another, our environment determines our actions. This has come to be over the course of evolution. In most situations, it is useful to consider the opinion of the people around you. And the point here is not that otherwise you can seem silly or ridiculous. The majority's opinion is fixed in the genes of social animals as strategically correct, promoting survival.
To go against our environment, well, for our brain, this is something out of the ordinary. It's evolutionarily dangerous. We show that by affecting certain areas of the brain associated with conformism, it is possible to make people nonconformists for a period of time. But again, the results of such experiments are usually not clearly noticeable. We ask a person in a few short and simple experiments to pay attention to the opinion of others. We see that, on average, they become less influential. We come from certain groups of people, family, for example, or your school group, or a student group, and their influence might be very strong in one case and weak in another. It might influence what you can do or what you know and understand, but it doesn't matter whether you understand the fact itself or not. These groups of people influence you.
Are you still sure you're ready to defend your point of view, even if the whole world thinks otherwise? Let's check it out. We asked young people to evaluate photos of a girl. How attractive is she in their opinion? At the same time, the only real participant in the experiment is Anatoly, the photographer. The task of the others, Philip, Kirill, and Ivor, is to contradict Anatoly's opinion, to make him doubt his decision, even if their opinion, in fact, coincides with his.
She is really beautiful, and she knows how to present herself. I really like the color of her hair. She creates a good mood for the photo shoot. I don't really like the nose line. I mean, it's straight. Quite ordinary. Exactly. Yeah, straight and rather rude. I can't really call her beautiful. I mean, she's nothing special. She comes and goes. You'd never remember her. She would make a good housewife and mother. She could cook and bring up children. She shouldn't be a model walking on a catwalk or being photographed for glossy magazines.
Here's the classic scenario of this experiment, which has been already carried out with hundreds of volunteers and with the use of MRI scanners. If the group believes that the woman is not so beautiful, the participant changes his or her opinion within an hour and agrees with everyone, and vice versa. And repeating the experiment a month later, scientists found that such an imposed opinion almost never changed. What about Anatoly? Having heard the unflattering comments of his friends, he begins to doubt his opinion.
She's definitely a beautiful girl. Well, there's something missing.
After the discussion, we asked young people to assess the attractiveness of the girl on a 5-point scale.
4, probably. Honestly, I don't like women with blonde hair. I prefer dark brown hair.
But at the very beginning of the discussion, Anatoly said that the woman is beautiful, that he likes the color of her hair. Remember how often you have heard your close friends say that someone is not smart enough, unkind, selfish, has the wrong background, and how it has influenced your decision. So next time you are misled by your friends or colleagues, don't blame yourself. You just had no choice.
I would give her a 3, honestly. Yeah, the eyes, I like her eyes, but the rest isn't really exceptional, I would say. 1. 1. I mean, there's nothing catchy about her. As for the look, it's wilted. She's not bright. She's not spectacular. If we get rid of all these trifles, she will be quite a plain human being. She won't be anything unique. You won't even remember her later. I guess a 3, too, not higher.
So the group, unlike Anatoly, deliberately considered the girl not very attractive. The young man, as a result, gave her only a 4. But at the last moment, he surprised everyone.
To me, she's like a summer day, warm, bright.
Despite hesitations and deviations from the opinion informal estimates, Anatoly remained true to his emotional evaluations. So psychologists say that in any team there is 10 to 20% of nonconformists who defend their opinion against the majority. Surely this is also an evolutionary useful device for the community. So what do we have in the end? Our decisions are determined by everything, but not by ourselves. There's a beautiful view outside the window, and we agree to a job offer. You got an adrenaline rush, and you are ready to set out for a dubious adventure, let alone something banal and commonplace.
One remarkable neuroeconomics study showed that with the help of oxytocin, a nasal spray, people can increase their trust in each other, in financial situations especially. So when people make an investment into something, a dose of oxytocin injected nasally makes the people more confident and trustful when they invest money.
Speaking of money, do you have any savings? Surprisingly, most people find it difficult to save for a rainy day or for their retirement. You would agree that you want to live comfortably now, not in a distant future. And this is not a trait, but another brain trick. In the so-called prefrontal lobe zone of the cerebral cortex, there is a small area associated with making rational decisions, the self-control zone. In other words, its neural networks assess the risks of decision-making. Of course, not only financial, any risks, even the risk of putting on weight. Now imagine you won $1 million in the lottery. With one condition, you get either the whole amount, but within a year, or only half, but immediately. What do you choose? Most likely the second option. After all, the longer we have to wait for the final result, the less pleasure it brings us. And waiting for pleasure is one of the strongest motivators of our actions. And in this case, different brain structures enter the fight for $1 million. Some allow us to act rationally and sensibly, while others require pleasure and as soon as possible.
At this moment, it all depends on the ratio of activity in these areas. If certain areas are more active at the moment than others, you're making the decision to receive everything as soon as possible. If the more rational areas are active, you decide to postpone the reward in time. It could be financial decisions, or it could be more complex moral dilemmas.
The same happens when you're on a diet. It is no secret that losing weight is not difficult. It's much harder to stay in shape. And this requires constant self-control.
Everyone understands that it is not a good idea to eat a box of chocolate truffles at once, even if they are the best in the world and handmade. But you want to, right? And you eat it, and nothing happens, by the way. I even think there are positive things going on. The amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for emotions, is activated, making you feel happy after you've eaten the chocolate truffles. Indeed, it creates a good mood for you. And in the end, instead of behaving like an angry dog barking at everyone in its way, you are sitting relaxed and pleased and drinking some, I don't know, Chinese tea. Why is this bad? When we think that something is rational to do, our brain responds like, of course, it is rational, but you still need rest and to kill some time.
But if our brain is so smart and self-sufficient, why do we make mistakes? I think every person has a history of wrong decisions. They are unpleasant to remember, to reanalyze, no matter how long ago it was. One might ask, why does the brain keep these painful memories? Wouldn't it be better to erase them and live happily? Alas, happiness is fleeting. We fall into the same trap over and over again.
The brain remembers both positive and negative things because when it is necessary to make decisions, you have to weigh everything, so to speak, all the pros and cons. And when you see only pros, you see only one decision. It is only one side of the coin. That's why we need both the positive and the negative. These are two sides of the same coin.
A load off my mind. This is what we say when something important that's been worrying you is dealt with. Work deadlines, unexplained relationships, renovation that lasts too long. It is all settled now. And the world is again full of colors, and life is beautiful. And it is all because our brain has finally done an important task and found an acceptable solution.
You have to make a decision. After that, you will be able to relax, not the other way around. Until the decision is made, you're not going anywhere. This will be a weight on your shoulders.
We are built to make hundreds of decisions at once without even realizing it. Thousands of reasons determine what we will do in any given situation, including those that we do not control at all. For example, the activity of brain nerve cells. In this, we hardly differ from animals. But in the decision-making process, only we can go beyond the bounds of biological needs. And then the spiritual values and ideals instilled in us by our family or learned from books come to the fore. Love, kindness. They make deciding things more difficult, but that's what makes us human.